A few weeks ago, in one of our first videos, we highlighted the rising tension between the Australian government and the Chinese Communist Party. In that video, and we do warmly recommend watching it to understand how we've reached this level of tension, we mentioned the importance for the Australian economy of trading with China, as well as the impact Chinese tourism has in growing the gross domestic product of Australia. Recently, it seems that the tension between the two countries has increased even further. Firstly, the Australian government has threatened to veto the acquisition of Lion Dairy and Drinks by China Mengniu Dairy.
Lion Dairy and Drinks is a subsidiary company of the Japanese multinational Kirin Brewery Company, a juggernaut in the brewery and beverage industry, with subsidiaries all over the world. Lion dairy products are extremely popular in Australia, with well-known brands such as Dairy Farmers, Pura and Vitasoy. Both the management of the Australian subsidiary and the Japanese holding company were forced to turn down an offer of $450 million for the milk and juice production operation of Lion Dairy. The offer, initially accepted, had been formulated by China Mengniu Dairy, a Chinese conglomerate involved in dairy and juice businesses. The Australian company commented in a brief statement, "Given this approval is unlikely to be forthcoming at this time, Lion and Mengniu Dairy have mutually agreed to cease the current sale process. We are disappointed with this outcome and will now consider pathways forward." Some regulators in Australia had already approved the deal. Last February, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission stated that it had investigated the matter and would not oppose the transaction. However, a few days ago, the Australian government has adamantly opposed to this acquisition, threatening not to give the necessary approvals in order to accomplish the transaction. This sudden change of mind lies in the fact that recently relationships between Australia and China totally collapsed due to the COVID pandemic. Last April, the Government of Australia called for an international investigation to determine the responsibility of China in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, the Chinese government has retaliated, implementing trade sanctions on a few Australian agricultural and livestock products, such as beef, barley and so on. Despite many commentators expecting a de-escalation between the two countries, reconsidering their respective decisions, tension has risen further after this Lion Dairy's accident and the following statements of the Chinese officials.
Shockingly, it seems that this disrupted transaction may become a trend in the future, since, according to newspapers and political sources, the government in Canberra has recommended the Australian Parliament to urgently approve a law by which the Australian government and Australia's Foreign Investment Review Board can veto transactions contrary to the national interest of Australia. In other words, whilst this situation between Australia and China persists, Chinese companies will not be allowed to acquire any asset in Australia. Now, this law may be expected to be enforced by next week. Obviously, as usual, we'll keep you posted on further developments. As such, we do recommend our viewers to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that we're in a position to provide you with prompt, fresh developments as they happen.
In addition, we also need to mention that the Chinese government, after a further request in July by the Australian government to commence the COVID international investigation on China, and the diplomatic protest over the new security laws imposed on Hong Kong, is now considering targeting another industry where Australia is flourishing. It seems imminent that the Chinese government will impose heavy duties on the wines imported from Australia, on the basis that Australian wines are heavily subsidised by the Australian government, as stated by the Ministry of Commerce in China. Australian Trade Minister Simon Birmingham rejected claims of wine dumping, affirming that Australian wine is by no means subsidised and by no means sold at or below market rates in the world market. The Australian government will work closely with the wine industry to defend these allegations and help ensure we put forward the strongest of possible cases to prevent the application of tariffs or duties on our winemakers. In the 2019-20 financial year, China accounted for $800 million worth of Australian wine exports. And Australia also holds the largest share of China's imported wine market at 37%, ahead of France with 27%. Once again, Australian economy may be severely affected by this trade sanction. As if that were not enough, on the 26th of August 2020, Mr. Wang Jining, Deputy Head of Mission for the Chinese Embassy in Australia, made warning remarks to the Government of Australia, which are expected to deepen even more the relationship between the two countries. Mr. Jining commented that it is approximately identical to Julius Caesar in his final days when he saw Brutus approaching him, hinting at the fact that China felt backstabbed by Australia in relation to the investigation promoted by Australia to look into China's responsibility for the coronavirus pandemic. He went on stating that, "I don't see any reason for whining about your constitutional fragility and intellectual vulnerability," making references to the official protest of Canberra for Chinese influence in the recent electoral campaign. And in relation to the Lion Dairy failed acquisition, Mr. Jining mentioned that a married couple know that a rift between husband and wife hurts one family, a rift between two countries hurts millions.
The tension's clearly escalating to a new level, and we'll make sure to keep you posted on any further development. In this regard, we need you to click on subscribe and turn on that bell. Also, please feel free to comment below. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.